So on the matter of when was Jesus' birth date, is the Bible accurate in its accounting? Apparently this fellow here in the black font seems to think there's enough to be considered the Bible isn't worth anything. Luke's nativity, he says, story hinges on its decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Caesar Augustus was the Roman emperor, but if the nativity took place in the reign of the King Herod the Great, the Jews were still Herod's subjects, members of a client kingdom, not a province under direct Roman rule. Blue font. You are somewhat mistaken here. It is true that Judea did not technically become a Roman province until 6 AD. But the facts prior to that indicate much tighter authority and control than your statement might lead one to believe. Rome did a military conquest before Herod the Great was even born. Pompey attacked Jerusalem and even invaded the temple and was made a tributary, paid tributes to Rome until Caesar defeated Pompey in Egypt around 48 BC. Herod the Great's dad had aided Caesar in that endeavor, and so won the favor of Julius Caesar, and with it a procuratorship of, plus Roman citizenship and exemption from taxes. Then in 47 BC, the daddy Herod appointed the son Herod to be governor of Galilee, still completely under Roman rule. He still had to be appointed tetrarch by Antony, still a thrall, huh? He was also proclaimed king by the Roman leaders, Octavius and Antony, in 40 BC. But he had to reconquer the land from the Parthians, which he did in 37 BC. As a client kingdom, they were still under the authority of Rome. All the other rulers, for example, were appointed, including all the Herods, and ratified by Rome. Rome controlled everything. Actually, when I keep reading your paragraph, it sounds like you are calling Luke mistaken in referring to Rome as driving the issue of the census. He is indeed making that point. But he is correct in that the client kings were still subject to Roman enrollment decrees. Here's a reference to that. The status of, goes on, the black font says, the status of client kings in the Roman Empire left them responsibility for their secret subjects' taxation. Blue font, not decision-making authority. They couldn't say no, but local execution of the enrollment process, yes. You do it. Figure out how you're going to do it. He goes on to say, relations between the Emperor Augustus and King Herod had often been stormy, and had even led to threats of Roman interference, which Herod and his envoys had to avert. However, their conflicts never caused the removal of Herod's royal status, although this was the only way in which his kingdom could have been taxed on Roman model in accordance with orders from the Roman emperor. It is not just that Herod the Great never coincided with Quirinius, the governor. He never coincided with the Roman taxing of. Well, here's blue font. The relationship between Augustus and King Herod had its ups and downs indeed. But the argument that his Roman granted title of king meant that his nation was exempt from taxes, tribute, census is just flat wrong. As I hinted at up above, it had become a tribute-paying tributary since its conquest by Pompey long before King Herod gets his title. More below on this. Augustus never issued a decree to tax the whole world. Robin Lane Fox, the unauthorized version, Truth and Fiction in the Bible. It is even doubtful, he quotes, if the Emperor Augustus ever issued a decree to Rome's provinces that all the world should be taxed. Certainly, Romans did take census in individual provinces, which were ruled directly by their governors. They were not, however, coordinated by an order from Augustus to all the world, at least so far as our evidence goes. Read Argument from Silence. See below points from historians' fallacies. Okay. So as that evidence extends to histories, local inscriptions, and papyrus returns of taxpayers in Egypt, it is immensely unlikely that a new edict of such consequences had escaped our knowledge. And I say, who are you trying to kid? You and I are looking at the same sources. No doubt, and there are huge gaps in the records. Immensely unlikely. In 86, he says, we do know that Augustus was enacting a new tax on inheritance to help pay for his armies. By the way, blue font, the taxation to support his army is the main reason it is believed that Quirinius assisted in the taxing of 8 to 5 BC. His extended military maneuvers on the Pisidian Highlands, dating from around 12 BC, would have required additional financing. Well, the black font goes on. However, the tax affected only Roman citizens, not Jews of Nazareth, and there was no need for a worldwide census to register their names. Well, blue font. Remember, the census in 86 is not the one of Luke 2:2, one of 8 to 6 BC, but the census of AD 6 did hit the Jews pretty heavily, at least 600 talents as a nation. To Josephus, Antiquities, 17:320, Jewish War, cited in Jeremiah's Jerusalem in the times of Jesus, an investigation into the economic and social conditions during the New Testament period. Fortress, 1969. See, evidence. As a national tax, it did affect the Jewish folks. Loads like this are always distributed to the people, in addition to the already oppressive tax structure of the Herods. And Luke does not place the worldwide census at the time of the AD 6 tax, but rather puts it sometime before the Syrian-based one in 7 to 5 BC. But more accurately, Luke was probably not referring to a taxation census at all, simply a registration. Registrations were normally associated with taxation, above discussion. You take a look at it. Second, military service. Jews were exempt. And 3, special government ballots. We have conclusive evidence that an empire-wide, in decree, not necessarily execution, of course, registration occurred in the time frame described by Luke. Martin, in his CKC, 89 to 90, summarizes the literary, archaeological, and iconographic evidence for this. The 6th reason for placing the nativity of Jesus in 3 or 2 BC is the coincidence of this date with the New Testament account that Jesus was born at the time when a Roman census was being conducted. There went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the Roman world should be registered. Historians, that's Luke 2:1, historians have not been able to find any empire-wide census or registration in the year 7 to 5 BC, but there is a reference to such a registration of all the Roman people not long before 5 February 22 BC, written by Caesar Augustus himself. Quote, while I was administering my 13th consulship, the Senate and the Equestrian Order and the entire Roman people gave me the title Father of my country. This award was given to Augustus on 5 February 2 BC. Therefore, the registration of citizen approval must have taken place in 3 BC. Orosius, in the 5th century, also said that Roman records of his time revealed that a census was indeed held when Augustus was made the first of men, an apt description of his award, Father of the country, at a time when all the great nations gave an oath of obedience to Augustus. Orosius dated the census to 3 BC, and besides that, Josephus substantiates that an oath of obedience to Augustus was required in Judea not long before the death of Herod. Antiquities 17:44I to 41 to 45. This agrees nicely, in a chronological sense, with what Luke records. But more than that, an inscription found in Phalegonia, eastern Turkey, also dated to 3 BC, mentions an oath sworn by all the people in the land of the altars of Augustus in the temples of Augustus in the various districts. And, dovetailing precisely with this inscription, the early 5th century Armenian historian Moses of Coron said the census that brought Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem was conducted by Roman agents in Armenia, where they set up the image of Augustus Caesar in every temple. The similarity of this language is strikingly akin to the wording of the Phalegonia inscription describing the oath taken in 3 BC. These indications can allow us to reasonably conclude that the oath of Josephus, the Paphlagonian inscription, and Orosius, and the census mentioned by Luke, Orosius, and Moses of Corinth were one and the same. Too much corroborative information to refute this. All of these things happened in 3 BC. What this means is that we have very, very clear evidence of an empire-wide registration in the time frame required. How much more data do you need? This guy just wants to throw out the Bible. In Judea, under Quirinius, we know from Josephus' histories of something more appropriate, not a worldwide decree, but a local census in AD 6 to assess Judea when the province passed from rule by Herod's family to direct rule by Rome. Although the census was local, it caused a notorious outcry, not the least of because some of the Jews argued that the innovation was contrary to Scripture and the will of God. According to the third Gospel, Luke, the census which took Joseph to Bethlehem was the first while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Blue font. I have already pointed out that first while is probably a mistranslation of the text. Before is more in line with Koine idiom. Quirinius' census was indeed the first, but it belonged in AD 6 when King Herod, the story's other marker, was long since dead. Blue font. A couple of concluding points. That Augustine might have issued a worldwide census decree, a record of which is only preserved in Luke's Gospel, is altogether reasonable and plausible. The data about Augustus' propensity to count and tax is well known. For example, he documents in his own records how he counted the Roman nation some 3 times, and increasingly levied detailed taxes throughout this region, with the attendant increase in bribery and vice. As vain as he was, it would not be surprising at all for this to have occurred. It was also testimony for the Roman Empire to take a census when there was a change of local government, i.e. when Archelaus was deposed in AD 6, one of Quirinius' first tasks was to liquidate his estate and hold a census to determine the tribute load. The implication of this pattern for our discussion is that when Darius became governor of Syria 7 BC, one of his first acts would have been to take a census, the one which would have produced the trip from Nazareth to Bethlehem. For we know Augustus instituted a 14-year census cycle for Egypt in 10 or 9 BC. Source book there. Not only does this give us more confirmation that Augustus was a counting sort of guy, but it may reflect the local execution of a worldwide decree of Augustus. To assert that Augustus did not make such a decree is an affirmative historical statement, and the burden of proof for any historical assertion always rests upon its author. So provide one, please. And to argue that Luke was wrong because there was no worldwide decree, because we don't have a record of the specific decree, is to make a common mistake in historical method. Arguing from slim silence, some silence arguments can be made to work, though. Hack it again. Evidence must always be affirmative. Negative evidence is a contradiction in terms. It is no evidence at all. The non-existence of an object, read worldwide decree, is established not by non-existence evidence, read we can't find the decree so far, but by affirmative action evidence of the fact that it did not or could not exist, i.e. a document that says it did not exist, did not happen. And in spite of the above methodological and background problems, we do have concrete evidence of an empire-wide Augustinian registration, literary, archaeographical, and iconographic. To summarize this section on the missing census of 75 BC, I have affirmative evidence and good arguments for such a census. Luke, a very, very, very reliable historian, says so. Augustus was this type of person with repeated known actions along this line. These kinds of events occurred at major changes in ruling personnel, a situation that obtained in Palestine at the time Luke indicates. Parallel events occurred in other Roman-controlled areas in roughly the same time as well, in 10 to 9 BC. There is not a scrap of contrary data. Quirinius, his participation in such an event, along with Varus, is not only possible but highly likely. We have positive evidence of an empire-wide decree of Augustus within a year or two of the required date. There you go. So, Glenn M. Miller wrote, CKC, which is Chronos, Kairos, and Christos, Nativity and Chronological Studies, presented to Jack Finnegan, Jerry Vardaman, and Edwin Yamauchi, editorials. There you go. So what we have now is Luke is accurate. The Bible is accurate. You can't throw it out on non-evidence, because we have evidence.